Imagine digging up the world's gold, growing most of the world's cocoa, producing the minerals that power smartphones and electric cars, yet earning only a small fraction of the final value. This is the reality for much of Africa. Every year, African countries export hundreds of billions of dollars worth of raw materials, but many import finished products made from those very same resources, often at a much higher prices. How did this happen? Why does a continent so rich in natural resources often capture so little of the wealth they create? And perhaps the biggest question of all, what would it take for Africa to change this story? Africa is one of the most resource-rich continents on Earth. The continent holds vast reserves of minerals, fertile lands, forests, fisheries, and energy resources. The Democratic Republic of the Congo supplies a large share of the world's cobalt, a mineral essential for rechargeable batteries. Ghana and Côte d'Ivoire together produce most of the world's cocoa beans. Botswana is famous for diamonds. Nigeria and Angola have exported oils for decades. Yet, despite this abundance, many African economies still depend heavily on exporting these resources in their raw or minimally processed forms. This means much of the value is created somewhere else. This wasn't always the case. Long before the European colonization, African societies produced far more than raw materials. Across the continent, skilled craftsmen forged iron tools, wove textiles, made pottery, produced leather goods, and traded finished products over vast distances. Cities such as Timbuktu, Kano, Kilwa, and Great Zimbabwe were important centers of commerce. Gold, salt, cloth, leather, and manufactured goods were moved through extensive trade networks connecting Africa with North Africa, the Middle East, Asia, and Europe. Raw materials were part of the economy, but they were only one part of a much larger picture that would begin to change dramatically during the colonial era. European colonial governments redesigned many African economies around one primary goal: extraction. Railways often connected mines and plantations directly to ports, not to neighboring towns or regional markets. Farmers were encouraged, or sometimes forced, to grow export crops like cocoa, coffee, cotton, rubber, and tea. Mining expanded to supply industries in Europe. Factories that could compete with imported goods received little investment. Instead of building diversified industrial economies, many colonies became suppliers of raw materials for overseas manufacturing. By the time independence arrived, this economic structure was deeply entrenched. When many African countries gained independence in the 1950s and 60s, they inherited economies designed to export raw materials. Changing that system was never going to be easy. Building factories require reliable electricity, modern transport, skilled workers, access to financing, and large stable markets. These take years, sometimes decades, to develop. Many governments also faced rising debt, political instability, and pressure to earn foreign currency quickly. Exporting raw materials became the fastest way to generate revenue. Over time, another challenge emerged. Countries that already had advanced industries could manufacture products more efficiently and often at lower costs. Competing with established global manufacturers became difficult. As a result, many African nations continued selling unprocessed resources while importing the finished goods made from them. The pattern established during colonial rule did not disappear overnight. In many cases, it simply continued under new governments in a very different global economy. The biggest profits are rarely made by extracting raw materials. They are made by processing, manufacturing, branding, and selling finished products. Take cocoa, for example. Farmers harvest cocoa beans, dry them, and sell them to exporters. Those beans are then shipped overseas, where they are turned into chocolate bars, candy, drinks, and luxury confectionery sold around the world. Each stage, processing, packaging, marketing, and retail, adds value. The same is true for cotton. Raw cotton may be worth only a small amount when exported, but once it's spun into thread, woven into fabric, tailored into clothing, and sold under a global fashion brand, its value increases many times over. The lesson is simple. The closer a country gets to the finished products, the more of the economic value it can keep. Millions of people depend on cocoa farming. Together, Ghana and Côte d'Ivoire produce most of the world's cocoa beans. Yet, much of the chocolate sold in supermarkets is manufactured elsewhere. That means many of the highest paying jobs and profits are created outside the countries where the cocoa is grown. The Democratic Republic of the Congo produces a large share of the world's cobalt. This mineral is essential for rechargeable batteries used in electric vehicles, smartphones, and laptops. But much of the refining and battery manufacturing happens in other countries. As the demand for electric vehicle grows, so does the importance of moving further up the value chain. Nigeria has long been one of Africa's largest oil producers. For decades, many of its crude oil was exported, while significant quantities of refined fuels were imported. This meant that value from refining often accrued elsewhere. Recent investments in domestic refining have the potential to reduce imports and increase local value addition, though the long-term impact will depend on efficiency, policy, and market conditions. Ethiopia is the birthplace of coffee and one of the world's leading coffee producers. Yet, consumers often pay premium prices for roasted coffee packaged under international brands. Roasting, packaging, marketing, retail generate much of the final value. These examples may involve different products, but they reveal the same pattern. The greatest reward often comes after the raw materials leave the country. If processing creates more wealth, why don't more African countries do it? The answer is more complex than it first appears. Reliable electricity remains a challenge in many regions, making manufacturing expensive and unpredictable. Transport costs can also be high. Poor roads, congested ports, and costly logistics make it harder for factories to compete globally. Access to affordable finance is also another obstacle. Building modern processing plants requires significant long-term investment, which is not always available. In some industries, manufacturers also struggle to find workers with specialized technical skills. Not because talent is lacking, but because education and training systems need continued investment to meet industrial demand. And finally, many African economies are relatively small on their own. Factories often become more competitive when they can serve large regional markets, not just domestic consumers. Industrialization, therefore, is not about building factories alone. It requires investment in energy, infrastructure, education, finance, technology, and regional trade, all working together. Despite the challenges, Africa's story is beginning to change. Across the continent, government and businesses are investing in industries that add more value before products leave their borders. In Ghana, some companies are processing more cocoa into chocolate, cocoa butter, and cocoa powder instead of exporting only raw beans. In Ethiopia, investment in textile and garment manufacturing have created jobs by turning cotton into finished clothing. Morocco has become a major hub for automobile manufacturing, exporting vehicles and components to markets around the world. South Africa has long produced vehicles, machinery, processed foods, and manufacturing goods alongside its mining industry. These examples show that industrialization is possible, but they also remind us that it doesn't happen overnight. Building competitive industries take years of investment, skilled workers, stable policies, and partnership between government and the private sector. The journey is difficult, but it has already started. One of Africa's greatest opportunities may not lie outside the continent, but within it. For decades, many African economies traded more with Europe, Asia, and North America than with neighboring countries. That is beginning to change. The African Continental Free Trade Area aims to make it easier for African countries to trade with one another by reducing barriers and creating a larger single market. A bigger market can make manufacturing more attractive. A factory producing refrigerator, clothing, processed foods, or electronics is more likely to succeed if it can sell to hundreds of millions of customers across multiple countries, not just within one national border. Regional trade can also encourage businesses to specialize, share supply chains, and attract investment. If successful, This could help shift Africa from exporting mainly raw materials to producing more finished goods for both African and global markets. So, what would it actually take for Africa to capture more value from its natural resources? There isn't a single answer. It would require reliable electricity to power industries, better roads, railways, and ports to move goods efficiently, education and technical training to prepare the next generation of engineers, technicians, and entrepreneurs, access to affordable financing so businesses can invest in manufacturing, stable economic policies that encourage long-term investment, and stronger regional trade that allows African businesses to reach larger markets. Perhaps most importantly, it requires moving beyond the idea that Africa's role is simply to supply raw materials to the rest of the world. The continent has the resources, it has the talent, it has one of the world's youngest and fastest growing populations. The challenge is creating an environment where more of the value is created at home. For generations, Africa has supplied the world with the raw materials that fuel global industries, from gold and diamond to cocoa, coffee, oil, and the minerals powering today's clean energy revolution. But the greatest opportunity may no longer be beneath the ground. It may lie in what Africa chooses to build above it. History helps explain why many economies still rely on exporting raw materials. But history does not have to determine the future. The choices made today in education, infrastructure, manufacturing, innovation, and regional cooperation will shape whether more of Africa's wealth is created and retained on the continent. The story of Africa's resources is no longer just about what the continent exports. It's about what it can create. If you enjoyed this documentary, don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications for more stories exploring the history, economies, and ideas shaping Africa's future. And now we do like to hear from you. What industries do you think has the greatest potential to transform Africa's economy over the next 20 years? Share your thoughts in the comments below.